Part 61. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guangguanggongzi. Chapter 601. As the night gets darker, the town is noisy. Travelers from north to south gather in the town, and even the streets are full of people under the eaves. The rooms on the second floor of the inn were overcrowded, and children and women often came and went in the corridor. Su Buling leaned against the door of the guest room, his hair still wet, waiting slightly bored for Neng Qingyi to take a bath. Wow! In the room behind, there was a soft sound of splashing water. It was obvious that the movement was deliberately suppressed, but it could still be heard clearly. The two of them traveled a long distance and were full of dust. Naturally, they had to freshen up when they arrived at the place of stay. They only had one room, and it was impossible for Neng Qingyi to take a mandarin duck bath with Su Buling, or ask Su Buling to help with a back rub or something. Su Buling couldn't let his daughter's family go out for a wild bath, so he went to the salt lake and took a bath himself. No matter what era, women can't take a shower quickly. Su Buling went out and came back, and Neng Qingyi didn't even finish washing. About half a quarter of an hour later, the sound of water splashing in the room calmed down, and Neng Qingyi's voice rang out. "Come in, I've finished washing." Su Buling turned around and opened the door. It was very cold in the first month of the year, and the small room was filled with mist, making it difficult to see clearly. Next to the screen, Neng Qingyi was wearing a clean snow-white dress, tightly wrapped up, with long cloud-like hair hanging down her back, and her cheeks were pudgy with a slight blush. Neng Qingyi was holding a wooden bucket in her hand. She wanted to bring clean hot water to Su Buling, but she was slightly surprised when she saw Su Buling's hair was wet. "Have you washed it?" Su Buling nodded and sat down on the chair. "I'm a man, and I'm not afraid of being exposed. I don't have to pay much attention when I go out." Neng Qingyi frowned slightly. "It's not like there's no hot water. It's winter. Are you going to take a wild bath in the lake? Are you full?" Su Buling blinked, hesitated, and then said directly. "Qingyi, I'm afraid of delaying your rest time. I don't want you to wait outside because you're full." Neng Qingyi suddenly realized it, thought for a moment, and nodded slightly. "Yeah, I'm serious about it." Su Buling had nothing to say. It seemed that when communicating with Neng Qingyi, he had to be more direct, otherwise no matter how warm-hearted the man was, he would just play the piano to others. Neng Qingyi put down the barrel, came to sit at the table, and looked at the double bed inside. "You go to sleep first, I'll keep watch and call you when the time comes." Su Buling took out the map from the package and laid it out on the table. "I'm not in a hurry. It's pointless to push it around. We all have to sleep anyway." Neng Qingyi thought about it, so she didn't say much. She stood up and walked to the bed. Just as she was about to put on her clothes and lie down, she suddenly remembered that she had just taken a shower and the gauze wrapped around her body was untied. The wound has just scabbed and healed, and it will definitely not work if it is not bandaged when it sees water. Thinking of this, Neng Qingyi turned around and glanced at Su Buling, who was sitting at the table looking at a map. After hesitating for a long time, she still didn't dare to take off her skirt. She lay down on the pillow and closed her eyes. Su Buling looked at the map for a while, then remembered the wound, and turned his head. "Qingyi, have you changed your dressing?" Neng Qingyi was not asleep to begin with. When she heard these words, she opened her eyes and hesitated. "Changed?" Neng Qingyi always said what she wanted and was not very good at lying. This sentence was obviously false. Su Buling frowned slightly, closed the map, stood up, took out the medicine, and walked to the bed. "The injury hasn't healed yet. Be careful of getting tetanus. There is no penicillin in this world. It can be fatal." Naturally, Neng Qingyi didn't understand. When she saw Su Buling coming over, she quickly sat up with a wary look in her eyes. "I can just do it myself." Su Buling sighed, sat down next to him, and put the medicine on his leg. It doesn't matter that you're in Fangshan County. You don't have to go out. You have to travel tomorrow. I saw that your riding movements were a bit weird today. The bandage must have loosened during the bumps. Doesn't it hurt when you rub the wound? As he spoke, he raised his hand to untie Ning Qingyi's belt. Ning Qingyi's eyes panicked, and she held Su Buling's arm, obviously trying to stop him, but after hearing Su Buling's words, she didn't know how to refute. After hesitating for a long time, he said seriously. You are not allowed to take advantage of others' danger again, or I. Su Buling frowned slightly. When did I take advantage of others' danger? A few days ago. I bandaged the wound carefully a few days ago without even looking at it. Is there a problem? After that. Then you persuaded me to take the initiative. What does it have to do with bandaging the wound? Ning Qingyi stared at Su Buling and held it in for a long time, having nothing to say. Su Buling smiled, took out his arm, raised his hand to untie Ning Qingyi's white belt, and placed it next to the pillow. He raised his hand and parted the skirt, revealing the snow-white belly band embroidered with lotus flowers underneath. There was still a bit of moisture on the skin, which showed a white, smooth, and delicate luster under the light. Ning Qingyi bit her lower lip and stared at the man's eyes, but she did not stop her and allowed him to remove her skirt. It wasn't until Su Buletinling glanced at the lotus that her face turned cold. What are you looking at? Su Buletinling is naturally difficult to explain. In this case, the person who can control his eyes is probably a saint, so he subconsciously glanced at the bulge. Well, I didn't see anything. What didn't you see? Ning Qingyi's face turned red, and her eyes almost burst into flames. You still said you don't want to be frivolous to me? You just saw it? Su Buling raised his eyes and smiled softly. Qingyi, haven't I confessed to you that I have lustful feelings for you? If you don't see it, then there is a real problem. Ning Qingyi's eyes were stunned. What is this all about? Acting like a hooligan with confidence. No matter what, it's you who is taking charge. Isn't this bullying an honest person? The lotus flower in front of Ning Qingyi kept rising and falling with her breathing. After enduring it for a long time, she finally couldn't hold it back and slapped her with her hand. Su Buling easily held his smooth wrist and said with a smile, "Don't be angry, turn around and I'll apply medicine for you." You. Ning Qingyi was already outspoken, but Su Buletinling turned things around and took advantage of others. She also couldn't grasp the logic and it was wrong no matter what. She was finally annoyed. She struggled for a few times, then raised her hand and pulled off the belly band in front of her. Facing Su Buling, she said coldly. Watch it? Don't you like watching it? Anyway, you have taken advantage of it. You are not ashamed but proud of it. If you want to watch it openly, why bother to bully others with strong words? In the dimly lit room, as the belly band was pulled off, the snowy light bloomed, and it seemed that even the room became a little brighter, and time seemed to freeze at this moment. Su Buling was stunned for a moment, but he didn't expect that Ning Qingyi would give up on himself after he couldn't say it. Look openly. Su Buling nodded and watched carefully. Okay. Good. Ning Qingyi sat upright by the bed, facing Su Buling. After being dazed for a moment, she gradually regained her senses under Su Buling's serious gaze. You. Ning Qingyi was almost stunned with anger. She hurriedly crossed her arms to cover herself up. She wanted to curse but didn't know how. Su Buletinling's expression was gentle and peaceful. He raised his hand to support Ning Qingyi's shoulders and asked her to turn around. Okay, I'll give you some medicine. Ning Qingyi was pushed and turned around. As she gave up on herself just now, she could no longer control her emotions. Qing Shui's eyes were misty and she said in a trembling voice. You are just a disciple, and you have been ill-intentioned towards me from the beginning. Do you think I'm stupid? You are so skilled in martial arts, how could you be kidnapped by me so easily, and you still take advantage of me to find out information for you, so you can repay your favor with a favor and a revenge on me. Now you are treating me like this when I am injured. Even men and women in the world would not treat their friends like this. Su Buletin moved gently and applied the wound medicine. Yes, yes, I have been ill-intentioned towards you since we met. Didn't you see it too? When you saw it, you didn't leave. You even bought me wine and came to me. Follow me everywhere. That's because you are kind to me and repay the kindness of people in the world. Do you think that I, Ning Qingyi, am an ungrateful woman? Of course not. I'll repay a favor. But I don't need anything, and you can't seem to be able to repay me. In situations like this in the world, don't you always give yourself to someone, and the past grudges can be wiped out? You think beautifully, you. Then what do you think we should do? Su Buling picked up the bandage and held both ends. I've seen it now and kissed it. We're not going to separate. We have to find a solution, right? The solution? How can this be solved? All the advantages have been taken advantage of. Ning Qingyi bit her lower lip, feeling confused. How do you want to solve it? Su Buling smiled and expressed with his eyes. Hands up. Ning Qingyi's breathing was slightly rapid, and her body was stiff for a long time. Finally, she closed her eyes and opened her arms. Su Buling held both ends of the bandage, passed it under his arm and around it to the front, pressed it against Ning Qingyi's cheek, and said softly. How about I marry you? All the problems will be solved, and the things that happened in the past won't be your fault. Ning Qingyi closed her eyes tightly, breathing up and down, and turned her head slightly without making a sound. Su Buling sighed secretly, gently wrapped his right hand around Ning Qingyi, stroked his left hand up her waist, and kissed her ear. Ning Qingyi trembled as the masculine aura surrounded her body. Her cheeks were still cold, but she could not hide the redness on her cheeks. After a moment, she held Su Buling's hand and said in a trembling voice. My parents' orders and the matchmaker's words are beyond my control. I will ask the master. If the master agrees, I will accept my fate. Ask my Dabai. What's the difference between that and asking me directly? With a smile on his face, Su Buling was satisfied. He let go of Tuaner, carefully wrapped the bandage a few times, and tied it tightly behind his back. Okay. Ning Qingyi didn't look back, nor did she put on her skirt without any extra effort. She turned around and lay down, lying on her side on the pillow, pulling up the quilt to cover her, leaving Su Buling's back and saying nothing. Su Buling sat on the edge of the bed and looked at it for a moment. Ning Qingyi then pulled the quilt further and even covered his head. Go to bed early. You don't have to change shifts at night. I'll sleep on the table. Su Buling chuckled lightly, picked up the snow-white belly band that fell on the ground, looked at it for a few times, put it in his arms, got up, walked to the bed and sat down, and continued to think about the map. Please give me likes, I still need 1250 achievement points. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 602. 8 days have passed since the Ningguo Pass incident. The situation was getting worse and worse. King Wu's heartfelt words poured fuel on the fire, pouring it on the heads of the civil and military officials of the court. Before the first month came out, the New Year's Eve atmosphere completely passed, as if he had returned to the past. The cold winter. It was already late at night, and the imperial study room behind the Taiji Palace was still brightly lit. Many high-ranking courtiers were waiting outside the imperial study room, while the 3 princes and 9 ministers were standing in the imperial study room. From time to time, the Emperor Songji could be heard yelling angrily. This Song Siming, how have I ever treated him badly? Excessive levies and heavy taxes, It's not like I haven't seen the disaster in Jiangnan. The disaster in Shu. I exempted the annual tax, and then exempted Jiangnan, and let hundreds of thousands of soldiers drink from the northwest wind. It's so big in the south of the Yangtze River, there are countless wealthy families. How much money does it cost to provide rice and grain for disaster relief? Have you ever heard old King Wu complain even a little bit? Every sentence is true, but it is also impotent and furious. If you want to impose a crime, why bother? King Wu impeached the emperor, and King Wei and King Yu immediately expressed their opinions, siding with King Wu and accusing Song Ji of having problems governing the country after he succeeded to the throne. In the final analysis, it was Song Ji who exposed his intention to reduce the vassal and touched the vassal king. It's nothing more than personal interests. How can you ask for orders for the people and serve the country wholeheartedly? Most of the courtiers' minds are as clear as a mirror, but it is useless to know. No vassal king will recognize these things if they are told, otherwise King Wu would not bother to find these 4 major sins to use as a master. Most of the 3 princes and 9 ministers come from prominent families, that is, those who have vested interests. Their interests are tied to the imperial power. Chaos in the world is not in the interests of prominent families. Not to mention the replacement of imperial power. Once the emperor and his courtiers change, the powerful families behind them will inevitably be reshuffled. When there is room for maneuver, the 5 Xiao Lu, Kui, Wang, Li and other minor surnames present must have chosen to maintain the current situation and stand on Song Ji's side. Lu Cheng'an, the great farmer, is the helmsman of the Lu family in Jinling. Like Xiao Chuang, his family is suffering from disasters. Although the king of Wu dare not touch the 2 great families of Xiao and Lu, the family's properties all over the south of the Yangtze River have been affected by the rebellion, so they cannot be regarded as didn't see it. Moreover, the north is in a shopping spree with northern Qi. As the saying goes, to deal with foreign affairs, you must first settle the domestic affairs. If the affairs in Jiangnan are not resolved, Daiyue, which has been recuperating for decades, may really be brought down. After the emperor finished scolding the 3 eastern queens, Lu Cheng'an took a step forward and said, "The 3 kings in the east have different intentions, and asking them to plead guilty is empty talk. The war in Taiyuan is urgent, and the internal troubles should be quickly quelled." The 3 princes and 9 ministers all nodded. They used the prince of the 3 eastern princes as a threat to make the 3 eastern princes admit their mistakes. Thinking about it, you knew it was impossible. The reason why the 3 princes stayed in Chang'an was to prevent the vassal kings from revolting. Now the 3 kings in the east are not rebelling, but are speaking out for justice for the people. They impeached Song Ji for being violent and fatuous. If Song Ji had killed the princes of the 3 kings in the east, he would not be able to sit down. He is convinced that he is a tyrant. It is even more impossible for Song Jixia to admit his mistake to the 3 eastern kings. Song Ji went too far in the Iron Eagle hunting deer, but the general direction was definitely correct, and there was something wrong with the matter of reducing the vassal. How could he commit the crime and admit the crime mentioned by the 3 kings, and put the stinking basin on his head? The best way to quickly quell this turmoil is to send troops to put down the Jiangnan rebellion, then ignore the 3 eastern kings, and then deal with them after northern Qi is destroyed. But in the current situation, the soldiers and horses of the western Liaoning Protectorate would definitely not dare to move. The kings of Wei and Yu have expressed their stance. It is good if they do not interfere with it, let alone expect them to quell the rebellion. There are more than 200,000 refugees in the Jiangnan uprising. With the secret encouragement of the king of Wu, the number is still growing rapidly. Without more than 100,000 elite soldiers, they will definitely not be able to quell it. Where can we gather these 100,000 elite soldiers now? Song Ji naturally knew that King Wu was adding insult to injury. After venting his anger for a moment, he sat back at the desk and said in a deep voice, "My dear friends, do you have any suggestions? Taiwei Guanhongzhou thought for a moment, bowed and said. The border troops originally used by the Western Liaoning Protectorate to suppress the rebellion could spare 50,000 and continue to march south, but it would be difficult to extinguish the rebels in the south of the Yangtze River in time. The King of Chu assisted in the defense of the northern border and had more than 200,000 troops. Although the combat strength is not very useful, but it should be no problem to destroy the rebels who are mainly refugees. Fu soldiers are ordinary military households. They serve the people in peacetime and soldiers in wartime. The quality of the soldiers is very different from professional soldiers such as the Guangzhou Army and Ziliang Army. Basically, the soldiers and horses in Daio are of this kind. They are used for maintain law and order in various places. However, although the combat effectiveness of the King of Chu's army is not as good as that of the border army, at any rate, a new batch goes to the border every 2 years for training. No matter how bad it is still better than the refugees wielding hoes. As long as they are willing to go, suppressing the rebellion should not be a big problem. Songji tapped his fingers on the table and thought for a moment. At this time, Songji did not want to use the vassal king's troops, fearing that the Chu king would also come out to cause trouble. However, if Jiangnan delays for too long, the problem will become more serious, and we have to see what the attitude of King Chu is. Yes, I have sent an order to the King of Chu to immediately lead his army to Jiangnan to quell the rebellion. Promise. The 3 princes and 9 ministers all bowed, and after making a decision, they bowed and exited the imperial study room. The next afternoon, in Fenglingdu town, pedestrians and merchants crowded around, but the big archway in the middle of the Gaiman Pass was a bit sluggish, and there were no people who were interested in the archway. Su Buling rode the wind-chasing horse and walked through the small square with Ning Qingyi. He turned his head and said, "Qingyi, have you ever been through hell?" Ning Qingyi rode on a white horse, wearing a veil on her head, her back as straight as ever, but she looked listless. Last night, Su Buling took advantage of her again, and she gave up on herself and pulled off her belly band to let Su Buling see enough. Her original intention was to irritate Su Buling, but she ended up irritating herself to death. That would have been fine, but Su Buling hugged her, rubbed and kissed her ears, and said he wanted to marry her. Ning Qingyi was very confused about emotional issues. She was hurt by her father's irresponsible behavior when she was young, so how could she have any ideas? She didn't sleep well last night, and she hasn't spoken since she got up in the morning. Hearing Su Buling's question, Ning Qingyi didn't want to answer. He drove his horse faster and walked in front, saying calmly, "You are not allowed to tell Manzi and the others about what happened yesterday. I will ask Master later. If Master agrees, I will settle accounts with you." Su Buling rode a horse and led another horse, and walked up to him faster. "What will you do if Master doesn't agree?" "Don't agree." Ning Qingyi's body stiffened a little. He wanted to say how could Master not agree, but felt that this was wrong, and finally snorted coldly. "Don't agree. You are frivolous to me, and I will break off all ties with you. If you touch me again, I will not care about the favor." Su Buling smiled, "Okay, it's a deal. Don't say I am irresponsible when the time comes." "You." Ning Qingyi clenched his fists, didn't say anything else, and quickly came to the ferry in Fenglingdu town. At the ferry crossing at the Yellow River Bay, there were endless boats. The Suwang Mansion's boat was parked among them, with the steps on the shore. Maids and messengers were running up and down from time to time. It was already dark, and the lights were on both floors of the boat. From afar, you could see the 3 girls, Manzi, Shuchu, and Yufu, gathered together on the deck, holding a telescope and scanning the Yellow River. On the first floor of the boat, at the window of Ning Yuhi's room, Zhongli Jiju was sitting with Ning Yuhi on both sides of the window, hugging their arms and facing each other. I don't know what they were talking about, but from the expressions, they must be mocking each other. Su Buling knew the two eldest wives best. Just by looking at their expressions, he knew that Yuhi was saying, "You dead woman, you deserved it for getting close to Ling Er." Jeju said, "You said that you are a master and you give everything to your apprentice, but you still have to hold me down. What do you want? What if Su Buling gets addicted?" Su Buling looked at them from a distance and felt a little funny. Perhaps it was because they saw him coming back with King Yi that the two mortal enemies immediately stopped arguing and disappeared from the window. On the second floor of the building ship, Aunt Lu stood at the window like Wang Fushi, and she didn't know how long she had been looking. After seeing him, her warm face was full of surprise, and she hurried back to the house and pulled Xiang'er out. Xiang'er was probably taking a beauty sleep, with a green mask on her face. After taking a look at the window, she quickly hid back, probably to wash her face and dress up. Su Buling smiled from the bottom of his heart, breathed a sigh of relief, and quickly came to the edge of the building ship. Ning Qingyi was a little distracted and didn't pay attention to the many small details on the boat. After getting off the horse, he led his big white horse to the deck. Su Buling thought Qingyi would go back to his room without saying a word, but he didn't expect Ning Qingyi to walk a few steps and see Manzi and the others running over happily. The first thing he said was, "Manzi, I picked up a wind-chasing horse in Taiyuan. What do you think?" His eyes were full of pride. Chuchu and Yufu were both delighted when they saw the majestic white wind-chasing horse, but Chuchu had her long-cherished white camel and Yufu couldn't ride a horse, so she didn't envy him too much. And Manzi glanced over and frowned immediately, and she was crying with envy. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 603. Seeing little Manzi biting her lower lip and looking pitiful, Su Buling was somewhat amused and handed the reins of the brown wind-chasing horse to Manzi. I just picked up 2 horses, you can ride them. When we return to Suzhou, I will send people to Mobei to look for 1 horse for each of us. Zhu Manzi's expression of biting her lower lip instantly turned into surprise. She hurried over to take the reins and said with a smile, "Mr. Su, this horse is too big. It's not suitable for me to ride. I'll help you take care of it first." Su Buling shook his head and chuckled. As soon as he greeted Yufu and Chuchu, Aunt Lu and Xiang'er came over, asking about his well-being. Although Zhu Manzi and Song Yufu missed Su Buling very much, they knew that they couldn't compete with the older sisters, so they took the wind-chasing horses off the boat for a walk, and Chuchu naturally followed. Because Su Buling and Ning Qingyi were both injured, Xiao Qi asked the girls to disperse after coming out, and let the 2 of them treat their injuries first. Arriving in the room of the shipbuilding, Su Buling completely relaxed, sat on the carved soft couch, untied his outer robe, and enjoyed Jeju's service peacefully. Next door, separated by a wall, Yuhi was also checking Qingyi's back wound. It was dark, the room was brightly lit and the heater was burning. Zhongli Jeju was wearing a water blue long dress, and her makeup and hair accessories were extremely delicate. Her skin was delicate and fair, and under the light, it showed a bit of crystal and hazy feeling, and a pair of fox-like charming eyes were even more seductive. However, at this time, Zhongli Jeju's expression was not very affectionate. She sat sideways on the soft couch and raised her hand to poke Su Buling's shoulder. "Why are you standing there like an idiot? Raise your hand." Su Buling was not surprised by this attitude. Last time on the boat, Yuhi and Bao bullied the newcomers and held Jeju down for a long time. Before she could catch her breath, she was dragged to Xiao Qi's room and tossed again the next day. Jeju was not as open-minded as Yuhi, so she naturally suffered losses everywhere. It was reasonable for her to be angry with her husband afterwards. Su Buling slightly turned sideways, raised his arm, and slowly stroked Jeju's back, smiling and asking, "My wife, what were you talking about with the master just now? It seems that you two were talking happily." Zhongli Jiju slightly twitched her waist, but was still pinched a few times, so she let Su Buling take advantage of her. She glanced at the next room, and after making sure she couldn't hear, she whispered, "Sister, what can I talk about with her? We're just quarreling. I don't understand why she is more confident than me, a Taoist priest and your master? You and I are at least unmarried, right? She made it seem like she was trying to steal my man. And you are a heartless person. She and Xiang bullied me, and you didn't protect me, but you helped to add insult to injury. Did you just pick up my wife?" Su Buling hugged Jeju's hips, pulled her close to him, and smiled apologetically. "How can this be called bullying? They just teased you because they saw that you were thin-skinned. When you get familiar with me after a few days, you will probably have to take the initiative to grab me, otherwise you can't even reach me to kiss me." Bah! Zhongli Jeju was fierce in her words, but she couldn't hide her longing in her heart. After being hugged and saying a few soft words, she also leaned obediently in Su Buling's arms and whispered, "Forget it, sister, I know you are in trouble. It's first come first served. I won't argue with them openly. But you are my husband after all, you have to protect your wife when it is time, right? In the future, don't drag me along. If that stinky nun Ning Yuhi insists on dragging me, don't do it from behind. I will secretly promise you, in front of them, I really want to die." Su Buling nodded, "Okay, let's try to fight one-on-one in the future." Zhongli Jeju got the promise and felt a little relieved, and said, "Also, I am a doctor, I know your body best, so what if you are Wu Kuei? If you are so unrestrained, you will die in Ning Yuhi's belly sooner or later. I have prepared some prescriptions for conditioning these days, you should give me medicine on time." "Take medicine, I don't think it's necessary. I'm doing this for your own good. If you don't listen, I will tell Mrs. Lu and Miss Xiao that you have hurt your internal organs because of your unrestrained behavior. You need to recuperate for half a year. Do you believe that they can let you be a monk for half a year?" Su Buling's expression froze. If Aunt Lu heard this, she would definitely let him give up women. He frowned slightly seriously and patted Jeju lightly on the back. "Jeju, as a doctor, you must seek truth from facts and cannot lie about the condition. I will just follow the doctor's advice. That's more or less." Zhongli Jeju snorted, treated the injury, stood up and patted her skirt. "I'm going back to my room. Chuchu has been complaining that I didn't teach her real kung fu recently. Don't get close to me and stimulate Chuchu. Go with your baby tonight." Su Buling chuckled, stood up and hugged Jeju's waist, leaned over and kissed her seriously. Jeju didn't hide. After all, she was newly married not long ago. How could she not be greedy for that kind of thing? After satisfying her desire for a little bit, she blushed and walked out quickly. In the next room, the furnishings were roughly the same, and the two of them were also sitting next to the soft couch, but the atmosphere was naturally very different. Ning Yuhi had a gentle and calm expression, and carefully changed the dressing for Ning Qingyi's back wound that was almost healed. As a person in the martial arts world, she could naturally tell that the gauze bandage was not tied by Qingyi herself, especially the bow on the belly band rope. It was tied in the standard way by Su Buling, who tied it for her, Jeju, Xiang and Xiaoqi. It was obvious at a glance. However, Ning Yuhi knew that Qingyi and Su Buling were deeply in love, so she was not surprised by this. She was just worried that Qingyi would find out about her affairs, so she didn't dare to speak up. Ning Qingyi didn't know that her master had sold her out a long time ago. She sat with her back straight, but her eyes were full of entanglement and she wanted to say something but stopped. After all, Ning Qingyi was just a girl under 20 years old, and she had never liked a man. She didn't know whether she liked Su Buling or not. But Su Buling had seen through her, and they had kissed each other, so it was impossible for her to marry another man. She couldn't figure out this kind of emotional thing, so she naturally wanted to give up and let the master who raised her since she was a child decide. But at this moment, sitting in front of the master, she didn't know how to speak. The master and the apprentice didn't say a word for a long time. Ning Qingyi was straightforward after all, and couldn't help asking. Master, what do you think of Su Buling? Ning Yuhi nodded gently with a gentle smile. Linger is very good, broad-minded, well-educated. He is well-educated. I mean, well, it's nothing, just asking casually. Ning Yuhi blinked his eyes, looked at his beloved apprentice carefully, and said softly. King Yi, did Linger bully you? Ning Qingyi shook his head. He didn't, he's very good, just forget it. Ning Yuhi didn't understand, nodded and smiled slightly, but didn't ask more questions. After the skin injury was bandaged, Ning Qingyi had just put on his clothes, and the next door was also done. The footsteps came closer and closer, and then Su Buling's voice sounded outside the door. Master! Ning Yuhi's face turned red involuntarily, but he quickly suppressed it and restored his dignified appearance as a teacher. He tilted his head and said. Linger, come in. Ning Qingyi's eyes were a little flustered. He turned slightly to the side, facing his back to the door, fiddling with the belt around his waist. The door opened, and Su Buling, in a white robe as white as snow, walked in. He raised his hand and saluted in a proper manner, then sat down next to Ning Yuhi. How is Qingyi's injury? It's almost healed. There shouldn't be any signs of it in 2 days. Ning Yuhi sat between the two disciples, feeling strange. She could clearly see that Su Buling didn't look like a disciple at all, but looked at her with the eyes of a young wife. She couldn't say anything, so she had to put on the attitude of an elder and asked with concern. Linger, how is your injury? It's healed. Su Buling saw Ning Qingyi with his back to them, sighed secretly, raised his hand and went around behind him, secretly pinched Yuhi's buttocks, and signaled with his eyes. Ning Yuhi straightened her body slightly, almost frightened to death, secretly nudged Su Buling's hand with her elbow, and tilted her head to look at Qingyi. Qingyi, why don't you speak? Are you worried about something? Ning Qingyi held the hem of her skirt tightly with her hands, gritted her teeth for a long time, turned around, glanced at Su Buling, then lowered her head and said softly. Master, I want to tell you something. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 604. When Ning Yuhi saw Qingyi's squirming look, he knew what to say. Although his heart felt strangely tense, a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Tell me, we have been dependent on each other for so many years. We say we are masters and apprentices, but in fact we are no different from sisters. There is nothing else we can say. Sisters. Ning Qingyi was confused for a moment and shook her head quickly. Master, don't mess with the young and old. Once you are a teacher, you will always be a father. Ning Yuhi felt more and more embarrassed, but could only smile on his face. Okay, just tell me what you have to say. Ning Qingyi was silent for a moment, looked at Su Buling again, raised her finger and pointed. Master, please don't let him, he likes me and keeps chasing me and forcing me to express my opinion. Su Buling raised his eyebrows and had nothing to say. Ning Yuhi suppressed the weirdness in his heart and pretended to be surprised and relieved. Ning Qingyi felt relieved when she saw that her master was not angry, and continued. Well, the matter of marriage between a man and a woman should be subject to the order of the parents and the words of the matchmaker. The disciple cannot make the decision without authorization. I have no parents and have been following the master since I was a child. Naturally, the master must decide this matter. Ning Yuhi's eyebrows are curved and her smile is full of smile. That's great. I've always felt that you two are a perfect match. If that's the case, I'll make the decision as a teacher and give it to you too. Ning Qingyi was stunned, she didn't even finish her words. Wait. Master, you haven't asked me what I mean, and I didn't say I like him. I just told you this. How could you? Well. Ning Yuhi's expression froze, and he turned back to glare at Su Buling calmly, probably saying, why are you two so right? Means, then turned around and said softly. Haha, I'm so happy for my master that I almost forgot. King Yi, do you like Ling Er? Ning Qingyi's cheeks were still cold. She wanted to say I don't like it, but I didn't like her coming here to tell her master what she was doing. Kissed, touched, looked at. Master, what I mean is that if you don't agree, I will let him give up. How could I disagree? Ning Yuhi looked serious, held Ning Qingyi's hand, and said sincerely. It's time for male students to get married, and for female students to get married. When you're old enough, I should worry about this for you as a teacher. It's not like being a teacher at such an old age, and you're still alone, with no one to rely on. If you survive, how pitiful I am. Ning Qingyi was a little confused. Seeing that her master was a little sad, she answered. Master, if you want to return to secular life and get married, my disciple will naturally support you. This is what you should do. How can you be allowed to be a nun on the mountain for the rest of your life because of what happened back then? Ning Yuhi sighed, King Yi, you just need to understand, but fate is so weird. Before we meet, we can't get married even if we want to, once we meet, we can't get rid of you. I'm afraid that the person I like in the future will be dissatisfied and angry. In that case, I would rather live alone and never get married. Ning Qingyi was a little confused by what he heard. He had been upright since childhood, so he naturally followed his master's words. How could I be so ignorant? As long as master has a fate with someone, no matter who he is, I will treat him with courtesy. Speaking of this, Ning Qingyi thought of something, frowned suddenly, and looked at Ning Yuhi suspiciously. Master, you won't fall in love with Li Hanzheng, right? This is absolutely not possible. Cough dash. Su Buletin coughed and almost lost his breath. Ning Yuhi's expression was slightly stiff, and he quickly grabbed King Yi, who was about to explode, and said dissatisfied. What are you talking about? How did I get involved with Li Hanzheng? Well, I haven't met anyone I'm destined for yet, I'm just talking casually. Ning Qingyi let out a long sigh of relief, as long as it wasn't Li Hanzheng. She sat up a little straighter and said seriously. Master, don't worry. As long as it's not Li Hanzheng, my disciple will not object to anyone else you like, even if it's Man Zi's father. No, Man Zi's father has a wife. Master, how can you be so young? The sword master is not like this either. Great face. What kind of brain circuit is this? Ning Yuhi felt a little sorry for his silly apprentice who couldn't turn. He held Ning Qingyi's little hand and said with a smile. I'm very happy that you have such thoughts. We'll talk about these things later. As for you and Ling Er, I think it's very suitable for me. It just so happens that Ling Er will get married this time when he returns, so the wedding happened to be done. From now on, she is your concubine. Ning Qingyi's eyes were filled with astonishment. How come the wedding day was even arranged? She shook her head quickly and said seriously. Master, you are too hasty. I just came here to ask what you mean. If you object, I will draw a clear line with him. If you do not object, then I will talk to him and understand each other. Just like Man Zi did when he was in Chang'an. Let's be a couple first and let's talk about getting married later. What can Ning Yuhi say? In this world, What is the difference between lovers and husbands and wives? However, she knew that King Yi was thin-skinned and it was not advisable to push the marriage too hard, so she said with a smile. That's okay. We all live together anyway, so it doesn't matter if you take your time. Well, King Yi, you've been running around for several days. Go down and rest first. Linger and I will give you a few words. Oh, okay. Ning King Yi was fooled by her master, and her head was confused. Before she could clear her thoughts, she stood up, glanced at Su Buling, walked out quickly, and closed the door. The room fell silent. Ning Yuhi breathed a sigh of relief after Qing Ye's footsteps disappeared. Before he had time to analyze the conversation, he felt his body light up and was picked up by his apprentice. He sat in the man's arms, and his two big hands began to touch each other. Ning Yuhi's warm cheeks suddenly turned red, and before she could recover from the role-playing of being a teacher, she said seriously. Ling what are you doing? King Yi hasn't gone far yet. Su Buling hugged Ning Yuhi, raised his hand and pinched the mature and charming face. I miss you, master, please call me sir. Ning Yuhi pursed his lips, but had no choice but to make sure that King Yi returned to the house before relaxing his body and getting a little closer. Miss Angong, what should I do now? King Yi and you are both like this. I can't be like Ye Juniang, who openly robs the disciples. Otherwise, you'd better get me a Taoist temple and leave me alone. That's all, I'll still be your master. Su Buling couldn't bear to let it go and shook his head. This is not a long-term solution. On Junshan Island, master insisted on pushing me, but I obeyed, so naturally I have to take responsibility. Oops. Ning Yuhi felt a little shy when he heard this. After all, if she hadn't gone crazy and took the initiative to eat Su Buling, she wouldn't be in such a dilemma now. Judging from what Su Buletin Ling meant, he thought, I want them all, and he refused to let her hide behind his back. Ning Yuhi's eyes were slightly tangled. Ling I really like you and King Yi, and I don't want to treat anyone badly. If you don't let me hide behind, what can I do? Su Buling hugged her a little tighter and thought for a while. How about I confess to King Yi? King Yi has a simple and straightforward personality. If she knows about our affairs, she will definitely run away from home to make room for me. No. Ning Yuhi leaned against Su Buling's chest, twirling a strand of hair with his fingers, and thinking carefully. These days, King Yi and I have said hello a lot in advance, and I don't know if she listened. I definitely can't be in front of King Yi, otherwise she will feel guilty. Or, how about you and King Yi cultivate a relationship first, and then wait? When she can't live without you, if I come out again, cry loudly, and seek death, it will be the same as what I just said, saying that I can't get rid of you because of fate, and there is nothing I can do. King Yi is very soft-hearted, I am sure. Just forgive me. As expected, it was the master who had arranged everything clearly for his apprentice. Su Buling nodded, that's a good note. It's not bad. It makes me like those women who are full of bad intentions. They even cheat their own apprentices. If it weren't for the future harmony between the three of us, master and apprentice, I wouldn't do these things. After Ning Yuhi finished speaking, he took a bite on Su Buling's face like a dragonfly, then pushed Su Buling's hand away and stood up. Okay, you go and have a rest. King Yi will definitely not be able to figure it out for a while. I will try to persuade her tonight. With eyes filled with relief, Su Buling stood up and followed his master out the door. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 605. It was getting dark. From the window of the wedding room on the second floor of the building, you could see 4 girls trotting on horses in the countryside along the Yellow River. Song Yufa couldn't ride a horse. She sat behind the nightingale and kept screaming, slow down, yeah yeah yeah. He looked like a group of playful children. Xiao Qi leaned against the window, watching in a daze, probably recalling the scene when she and her sister were playing around in Xiao's manor in Huainan when they were children. The two of them played with bamboo horses and flew paper kites. They didn't need to think about those troublesome things, and they only had innocence and childishness in their hearts. It's a pity that childhood is always short, and when you grow up unknowingly, your younger sister marries away to Chang'an, and she focuses on the family business. After 10 years of separation, they were supposed to go their separate ways, but in the end they got together again in a dreamy way. Also married to the same man. There is nothing wrong with the current situation, but they are very happy, but they are obviously different from when they were young. The reason why Xiaoqi stood at the window and missed the sister's childhood was entirely because the innocent sister back then had become. "Sister, come here quickly. I made a fox tail for you. How about you try it on for size?" Bah! Xiao Qixing's eyes were full of anger and annoyance. She turned around and sat down next to Ruantan. She raised her hand and pinched her sister's waist. "You damn girl, you're so good at not learning, but you're still learning these unattainable things. Look at you, what have you become now?" Xiao Xiang'er, who was wearing a bright red dress, was leaning on the couch, her tail hair brushing her hands, nonchalantly. "We are sisters, what are you pretending to be in front of me?" I don't know who screamed the loudest in the boudoir, like Mr. Be gentler, it's my turn, it's my turn, is it a red Luan? Lu Hongluan was sitting upright on the chair next to her, with her hands folded on her waist, her face turning red and white. She obviously wanted to scold Xiao Xiang'er, but was too embarrassed to speak. After all, last time in the wedding room, she served Su Buling tea and poured water to wipe his sweat. She wiped her shirt and wiped her clothes. I have the nerve to act dignified and discipline Xiao Xiang'er again. Xiao Qi has always had a strong mind and did not blush at all when facing her sister's teasing. She raised her hand to snatch the tail and threw it into the box under the coffee table. "Sit tight, sister. Su Buletinling will come later. If you continue to stir up trouble, you won't be able to leave the house again. There are state laws and family rules. If you continue to do whatever you want, you won't be able to bring down the whole girl in the back house. It's gone astray." Xiao Xiang'er was still a little afraid of her sister. She snorted lightly, picked up the small mahogany sign at her waist and played with it, and said nothing. The three of them sat for a while, then the door opened and Su Buring walked in. Lu Hongluan had been worried to death these days. He stood up in a hurry, walked up to him, and raised his hand to touch the hem of Su Buring's clothes. "Ling how's your injury? Are you okay?" Su Buling took his aunt's hand, walked to Ruantan and sat down. "The skin injury is fine." Seeing Lu Hongluan let go, Xiao Xiang'er looked at her with admiration and longing for her. She felt funny in her heart, so she put her head on Su Buling's shoulder and sniffed. "Hongluan, why does Su Buling smell like powder? There are several women, don't you smell it?" Su Buletinling's expression froze slightly and he glanced sideways at the baby. Lu Hongluan had seen everything the 5 people in front of him had done, and his jealousy had long been shattered, so he just snorted softly. "So what if I smell it? I am his aunt and you are his wife. If you are not anxious, why should I be anxious? You are still an aunt. If you have an aunt, you can hold it and feed it yourself. Okay." The more Xiao Qi listened, the more something was wrong. Her face sank slightly, and she stopped her best friends from being angry. She raised her hand and pointed to the chair opposite. "Excuse me, why don't you sit over there? Why are you here? Isn't it too crowded?" Su Buling was also afraid that the fight between his aunt and Bao Bao would affect him, so he got up and sat upright opposite the tea table. He glanced at the tea table and saw a wine jar on it. The wine jar was in the shape of Sun's shop. After drinking for a whole year, he recognized it at a glance. Shopkeeper Sun often said that after drinking Duaniashuo, other wines would lose their taste. This statement is obviously true. Su Buling has never touched Duan Yushao since he left Chang'an. He used to carry a wine gourd with him, but now he rarely does so. It's not that I've given up drinking, it's that whatever I drink is just like drinking water, tasteless and tasteless. Seeing the Duan Yushao again, Su Buletanling started to feel the alcohol bug that was almost starving to death in his stomach. He picked up and opened the cork and smelled it. The smell of strong liquor rushed straight into his heart, and he felt relaxed and happy. Xiao Qi sat next to Xiang Er and said, Hongluan said you liked this, so he sent someone to Chang'an City to buy it. The old shopkeeper had a stubborn temper and refused to sell more to anyone, so he only bought 2 pots. Su Buling took a sip and nodded slightly. Madam, you are interested. Would you like a sip, baby? Xiao Xiang rested her elbows on the pillow and held up the side of her face. I don't want it. Let my sister drink. She can let go when she's drunk, but she knows how to play. Xiao Xiang Xiao Qi's voice turned cold and her eyebrows stood up. It wasn't until Xiao Xiang sat down and stopped talking that she said with a serious expression. We are discussing business today. Who will make jokes or dance with their tails next to us? We will stop when we finish talking. Including you, Hongluan. Lu Hongluan coughed slightly, sat up a little straighter, lowered his head and said nothing. Xiao Xiang didn't like being controlled by her sister, so she couldn't help but mutter. Sister, if Su doesn't make jokes, she still has to dance with her tail? Xiao Qi rubbed her forehead, leaned over to take out the tail, and threw it to Su Buling. Husband, let Xiang go to the side to dance. Su Buling felt a little funny in his heart, but his expression was quite serious. He picked up the tail and stood up and walked towards the baby. Xiao Xiang's face suddenly changed, and she quickly shrank back. Oh, good brother, good sister, the baby was wrong, let's talk about business. Xiao Qi was satisfied, sat up straighter, and said seriously. Today there are 2 main things. One is the wedding in Suzhou, and the other is the current situation. Although these 2 things seem to have nothing to do with each other, they still affect each other. Su Buling leaned back in his chair, looking at the 3 charming beauties sitting side by side, but he didn't think about it and listened carefully. The north attacked the border, and the king of Wu took the opportunity to list the 4 major crimes and impeached the current emperor. I won't say much about the reasons. The purpose must be to pull down Songji and replace him with an emperor who has no intention of reducing the power of the vassal states, and by the way warn future monarchs not to dare to touch the interests of the royal family and vassal kings. The 3 kings of Wu, Wei, and Yu have already expressed their opinions. The king of Yu in Lingnan has no say and will definitely be a fence-sitter and will not speak casually. The remaining 3 kings of Chu, Su, and Shu, the king of Shu will definitely stand on the side of the court, but he has just suffered a disaster and has no military power. He can't even guarantee logistics, so he is not very useful. Therefore, how the king of Chu and our Su Wang lineage stand is very important. Su Buling had analyzed these a long time ago and said softly. The king of Chu is between the 2 sides. He is close to the water and has the surname Song. The court will definitely win over the king of Chu first. We will do this in a short time. I'm afraid it won't work. Xiao Qi nodded. 1 move affects the whole body, the war has started, and it's impossible to stay out of it. This time, the plan of abolishing the emperor and establishing a new one must be supported by many aristocratic families. How the major aristocratic families stand is also very important. At present, the 5 major surnames are on the side of the court. My second brother has entered the court as a prime minister and has great say. It's a taboo for you and me to get married. When the court needs to use the Ziliang army, Prime Minister Xiao will definitely avoid suspicion and dissuade it, otherwise the emperor will definitely suspect that the Xiao and Su families are working together for the country. Lu Hongluan has heard and seen a lot about the politics of the aristocratic families since she was a child, and she still knows a little bit. She looked at Xiao Qi curiously. Miss, do you have the intention to work with Ling Er for the country? The Song family killed Ling Er. If so, can replace you. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 606. Su Buling raised his hand. Auntie, even though we are a family, these words are too much. We haven't even written a single word yet. Xiao Qi also looked a little helpless. How can a country be so scheming? The most important thing at the moment is to let Ziliang take the dominant position and stay in the barren land of the western regions, forever being controlled by others. The current consideration should be to take advantage of this opportunity, let the Ziliang army station in Guangzhou, preferably near Chang'an City. As long as they stand firm, they will stay and lay the foundation for the future layout. The 6 Song vassal kings will definitely make peace first. The Lord will join forces to destroy the Su family. Lu Hongluan nodded slightly, knowing that it was a bit whimsical, so he didn't interrupt. Xiao Qi continued, in order for the current emperor to use the Ziliang army, the first prerequisite is that northern Qi cannot fight back. The king of Chu has fallen to the 3 eastern kings, and the emperor is isolated and helpless. But isolated and helpless, even if the emperor compromises and abdicates, it is impossible let the Ziliang army enter Guangzhou with the intention of usurping the country, so we have to be more restrained and not let the emperor be too afraid. Su Buling thought for a while, how to restrain it? Xiao Qi tilted her head and looked at Lu Hongluan. This wedding already represents the marriage of the Xiao and Su families, and this matter is already very sensitive. If you openly bring Hongluan in again, it will be an alliance between the 3 Xiao Luxu families. This is not a trivial matter, the existing team alone can form a court directly. When Lu Hongluan heard this, he nodded quickly. Yes, I didn't want to get married together. I am his aunt, so how can I marry openly? Ling Er and I, we can just have a secret marriage after we go back. Xiao Qi thought for a while. There is also Ning Yuhe. Ning Yuhe almost became the queen before. How will the emperor deal with you when you marry him? And Xiang Er? Xiang Er is the emperor's mother and cannot even show her face. You, what treacherous things have you done? Let the emperor know, and I must kill you first. Xiao Qi originally had Gu Jing Liubo's temperament, so she was a little annoyed when she mentioned this. If the emperor knew that his engaged fiancé and his serious stepmother were sleeping in Su Buling's bed, playing with their tails and calling them good brother, it would not only spread Su Buling's ashes, but also make them feel sorry for the dragon robes they were wearing. After being scolded by her sister, the queen mother's face turned red and she lowered her head, embarrassed to speak. Su Buling coughed slightly, looking slightly embarrassed. Well, it's just a coincidence, it's fate, there's no way to avoid it. Now that the matter has come to this, Xiao Qi has nothing to say, she just hums. Fortunately, Empress Kui died of illness early, otherwise, you might have stolen even the current empress. How much do you hate Songji? Do you want to get another princess for you? Let's get together with the 3 generations of old, middle-aged, and young people. Bed. 3 generations sharing the same bed? Su Buletinling spread his hands and looked helpless. Kikai, am I that kind of person? It's true that I like women, but a gentleman loves beauty in a proper way. How can he approach a woman for revenge? Xiao Xiang'er was also a little annoyed. What old, middle-aged, and young people? Sister, can you speak? I am the same age as you, how can I be old? Besides, you are still Aunt Hongluan, and Hongluan is Aunt Su Buling, you how do they count? You call him husband, but he calls you grandma. The more he talked, the more confused he became. Lu Hongluan looked slightly embarrassed. Stop talking. You know you won't be able to get on the stage and you still say it, after we get married, we won't have these messy relationships anymore. Su Buling also nodded, yes, if you don't mention these, I am the same as the scum who has no manners and corrupts the rules. You even dare to deceive your master and destroy your ancestors. How dare you say that you are a gentleman? Okay, okay. Su Buling stood up, picked up the snickering baby, and walked to the bedroom behind. We've finished talking about everything, let's have a rest. We'll talk about anything tomorrow. We'll be back in Suzhou for at least half a month, so we have plenty of time. When Lu Hongluan saw this, his expression froze slightly, and he stood up, then, Your Majesty, I'm going back to the room first. Su Buling threw the baby on the quilt, turned around and picked up Lu Hongluan. Aunt Lu is the most considerate. It will be nice to help you pour water and put pillows on me later. Anyway, I will be alone when I go back to the room, which is boring. Lu Hongluan curled up her hands in front of her body, her embroidered shoes dangling in the air, her eyes were embarrassed, but she didn't know how to refuse. Xiao Xianger was very interested and patted the pillow. Hongluan, come here quickly. Aren't you sore? This time I'll make you so sore. Xiao Qi knew that Lu Hongluan was still the eldest daughter who had not yet left the court. When she saw this scene, she was slightly annoyed. Are you two human beings? What's the difference between bullying Hongluan like this and eating meat yourself and letting others watch? I'm just worried that Aunt Lu will be bored. It's okay to just chat, but it doesn't have to be anything like that. Su Buletinling walked back with a smile and picked up Miss Xiao with her arms outstretched. As the night got darker, as everyone arrived and loaded onto the ship, the building ship sailed out of the port silently in the night, entered the Wei River, and headed for Suzhou, the capital of the Northwest, 2,000 miles away. On the first floor of the building, Ning Yuhi slept in Ning Qingyi's room, still working tirelessly to enlighten his disciple who was in the period of youth confusion. Zhongli Jiju was diligently mixing medicine and feeding insects in the house. She knew clearly what Su Buling was doing upstairs, and missed her very much, but she was afraid that Chuchu would see her, so she didn't dare to go up and join in the fun. In Song Yafu's room, the four girls who had finished walking their horses found a big blanket to spread on the floor after bathing and changing clothes. Then they lay side by side, covered with thick quilts, looking at the moonlight outside the window and staying up late chatting. The little sparrow was almost cooked by the nightingale, but maybe it was because it was used to being in Juju's arms, and it couldn't find the feeling of home in the nightingale. At this time, it jumped repeatedly on Manzi and Chuchu, choosing a comfortable place. Zhu Manzi was the most lively and looked around. Why doesn't Xiao Ning come over? I also want to ask her about capturing the king before the formation. The nightingale is slender, lying in front of Manzi. It doesn't matter what she wants. Her eyes secretly compare from time to time. Miss Ning was injured and traveled a long distance, so she has rested. Zhu Manzi nodded and stopped disturbing Qing Yet. Instead, he held the back of his head and looked at the moon outside the window. We are finally going back to Suzhou. By the time we arrive, spring will be here soon. Mr. Su has talked about the big sea of flowers there many times. It will definitely be beautiful. Zhongli Chuchu had been to Suzhou and had seen the sea of flowers from a distance, and said softly, "That's it? Suzhou is relatively desolate. There are soldiers and horses everywhere. There are not even a Jianghu person. However, there are many people who look similar to me." Zhu Manzi frowned and looked at her a few times. Is she about as beautiful as you? How is it possible, you think Ba Kui is just a cabbage? I mean, the skin color and eyes are about the same. Zhongli Chuchu was the tallest, with an exotic figure that was even hotter. She looked one size larger than the other three girls. At this time, She deliberately puffed out her chest, so full of breath that it made Nightingale shut up. Zhongli Chuchu said a few words. Seeing that his best friend Song Yufu was silent beside him, he tilted his head and said, "Yufu, what's wrong?" Song Yufu lay beside Chu Chu, looking at the moonlight outside the window, hesitated for a moment, and then spoke softly. "It's nothing, I'm getting married when I arrive in Suzhou, so I'm a little nervous." "Yes." Zhu Manzi just remembered this, his face froze slightly, and he sat up. It was too cold when the quilt was lifted, so he was pushed back by the girls on both sides. Zhu Manzi's eyes were full of nervousness and he said with a red face, "Why are you getting married as soon as you get off the ship?" "It's weird, I'm not even ready. No, my dad said he wanted to see me get married. Now my dad is in Jiangnan and Qingyi. Her dad is rebelling and doing big things. She must have passed. If you don't come, I should wait until next time, with Xiaoning." After saying this, Zhu Manzi breathed a sigh of relief, the tension on his face subsided, and he returned to his normal look, and began to comfort. "Fiubeo, don't be nervous. Big girls always have to get married. If you extend your head with a knife, it will be the same as if you shrink your head. What's the big deal?" The three girls were speechless and all glanced sideways at Manzi. Manzi also felt that it was not good to make sarcastic remarks, so he chuckled and said instead, "Did the big clock come in with you?" Zhongli Chuchu pursed his li. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 607. The setting sun shines on thousands of miles of yellow sand, and the desert is endless. The oasis surrounding the lake is located between the sea of sand. Against the backdrop of the vast world, it is as small as a small green leaf and may be eaten away at any time. At the top of the sand dune at the edge of the oasis, a little black dog that had lost 3 laps of weight was sticking out its tongue and looking at the very distant west, its eyes full of confusion. After all, as a dog who grew up in a palm-sized canyon, he thought he would accompany his master for a walk, but it turned out that he had wandered thousands of miles without finishing the walk. Standing on this sand dune, it even wondered whether the rest of the dog life would have to continue walking on the road with no end. It's almost February, and the vegetation in the oasis that has been dormant all winter has sprouted. Many small animals that live in the oasis are cautiously drinking water by the lake. There is also a wild wolf that appears out of nowhere and vomits. Sticking his tongue and rolling his eyes, the rickety old man used him as a stool and sat under his butt. The woman in Jingchai sarong squatted by the campfire, with 3 wooden sticks in front of her, with grilled fish just caught from the lake skewered on them. Seeing the setting sun at the end of thousands of miles of yellow sand and the smoke column rising from the bonfire, the woman whispered, "The bicycle is about to ask for directions, and the country it belongs to is passing through Juyin. The expedition leaves the Han dynasty, and the returning geese enter the Hushan. The desert is solitary and the smoke is straight, and the sun sets over the long river." After traveling thousands of miles, it was obviously difficult to walk down on 2 legs. There were 2 large camels obtained from unknown places beside the campfire, standing together chewing grass blades. Eunuchia sat on the back of the wild wolf to rest, folding his sleeves with his hands, looking at the red sun in the distance, and nodded thoughtfully. The solitary smoke in the desert, the sun setting over the long river, it suits the occasion. But what does Hansai mean? Our family didn't understand it. Maybe it would be more appropriate to change it to Yusei. After traveling thousands of miles from the northeast to the northwest of Daewoo, Kui Zioan looked a little more dusty than before leaving home, but there was no trace of fatigue or boredom on her face. She was still as if she was living in a peach blossom forest. "Don't worry about worldly affairs and take things as they come." Hearing Eunuchjia's doubts, she explained seriously. "That person said it was Hansai, which was the frontier fortress of the Han dynasty. It comes from the Han dynasty. The Han dynasty. Eunuch Jia recalled that from Xia, Shang, and Zhou to the present, he had never heard of such a dynasty or this ancient book. He didn't know where Su Buletinling heard it from. At the moment, he could only shake his head slightly, not knowing how to answer the question. Kui Zioan turned the grilled fish with her hands, recalling the conversation that night in the canyon, and said, "The man also said that the Han dynasty was so powerful, and that anyone who offends my strong men will be punished no matter how far away. Unlike the Song dynasty, at home, the Zhang family has fought back, and they are still thinking of fighting within themselves." The two people set out from Yuzhou and crossed Daiyue. When they reached Taiyuan, they were blocked by war. Although Eunuch Jia was old, he had only a few soldiers. Naturally, he could not do anything to this old god who had been guarding Daiyue Palace for a period of time. He led Kui Zioan across the battlefield and saw all the chaos on the bloody battlefield. Kui Zioan has not cared about worldly affairs since she was a child and only likes flowers and plants. She has a very indifferent view of the concept of life and death. In her heart, there is no difference between people's birth, old age, illness, and death and the 1-year-old and one withered flower. They are all laws of nature, and there is nothing sad or merciful about them. But when the two armies are fighting and hundreds of thousands of the same kind are killing each other, it is obviously not a natural law. As the master of the world, the emperor, just like God, who moves clouds and rains in the sky and controls the life and death of all things, should avoid these things. Now that Kui Zioan has not done her job well, it is natural that complaining about the emperor is as useless as complaining about the bad weather. Hearing this, Eunuch Jia smiled softly. It's the same in every dynasty and every generation. Daiyue, can't keep the barbarians from all directions in check. But in all dynasties, most of them died because of their strength. The vassal kings, if you are immortal, this day will come sooner or later. If you want to destroy the feudal king, you will have this day in advance. Today's emperor is too ambitious. Within just 10 years after taking the throne, he started to purge the world, launch imperial examinations, suppress military attaches, and plot to reduce the vassal state. Purging the world was an overkill. Daxink used civilian students for weightlifting, which touched the interests of the noble families. Suppressing the military attaches also angered the general families, not to mention cutting down the vassals. Almost all the people who shouldn't be provoked were provoked. The general direction is correct, but this is something that should have been slowly implemented over several generations. If you want to do it all at once within the 20 or 30 years of being in power, without leaving any future troubles for your descendants, how can it end up like this? Not surprising. Kui Zioan didn't like hearing these things, so she just asked, "When will the war be over?" Eunuch Jia shook his head. "It's hard to say. It could take 1 or 2 years at the earliest. If it's too slow, the world would be torn apart. It would be normal for it to drag on for more than 100 years. Kui Zioan frowned and stopped thinking about things that couldn't be changed. She turned to look at the sky. It's almost February. How far is it from that big sea of flowers? Eunuch Jia made an estimate and said with a chuckle, "It's about 500 miles, and we can get there in 7 or 8 days. Are there any peach blossoms growing there?" "I don't know about this, but peach blossoms are common and should be planted." "Then we have to walk faster. The peach blossoms are the most beautiful in early February. If I go there late, I won't be able to see them." Kui Zioan picked up the grilled fish and handed it to Eunuch Jia. Then she sat down on the grass, nibbling on the grilled fish and feeding it to the little black dog. Eunuch Jia took the grilled fish, thought about it for a moment, and sighed softly. Speaking of the big sea of flowers, the old slave does know some of the reasons. In Chang'an City, that boy's father fell in love with a girl in the Jianghu. The girl grew up on the side of the 100-foot cliff in the East China Sea. On the 100-foot cliff is the sea of flowers. In order to please the girl, the boy's father promised to build the largest sea of flowers in the world and win the girl's heart. However, the old slave did not expect that the family property could be passed on to future generations, and even such things to please girls could be passed down from generation to generation. Looking at the current situation, as long as the sea of flowers is there, sons and grandsons will not have to worry about their wife. When they meet, they will say, "I have a huge sea of flowers at home. Do you want to come home with me, and then take the girl back?" Already. Kui Zioan liked these stories. She thought about it and nodded seriously. Women like flowers. When I was at home, many ladies often came to see the peach blossom forest. However, that man was very handsome. I have seen him before. The most handsome one doesn't need to use flowers to please a girl, just twitching his fingers. That's right, Zhao Hongyai is not just a name in vain. Falling into the sunken sand dunes, on top of a small oasis, a bonfire set off an old man, a young man and a dog. Talking, laughing, and free. Although the little black dog chewing fish bones is a bit lifeless, the scene is still very warm. Well, at least that's how it looks in person. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 608. The spring breeze dawns. Outside Suzhou City, the number of foreign business travelers entering the customs has decreased by 80% compared with the autumn. The vast yellow sand is vast and looks a little depressed. However, the huge sea of flowers beside Yuanyang Lake is already colorful, and it is even more beautiful than the misty rain in Jiangnan. The wooden house still stayed quietly in the middle of the sea of flowers, with the cradle and deck chair placed in place. The wind chimes were swaying in the never-ending breeze. Countless flowers of all kinds were causing ripples in the wind. In Suzhou City, at the Prince Su's mansion at the end of Beishi Avenue, 2 rows of willow trees have been tied with red flowers. Red lanterns are hung high on the vermilion lacquered door. The 3 doors are wide open. Behind the screen wall of the palace, maids carrying lampstands, tables, and chairs can be seen. The servants were running back and forth. King Su, with his golden hair, wearing a golden crown and a python robe, stood on the ridge of the building, holding a large blueprint in his hand, looking down at the main palace square below, and occasionally said, "Yang Zunyi, you don't know the difference between left and right? When you prepare to bow to the emperor, do you want me to turn my back to the newlyweds?" Yang Zunyi, one of the 4 generals under King Su and one of the 4 generals from the east, who held 50,000 Ziliang troops, carried a large Wanghuali wood chair weighing about 300 kilograms, raised his head and said with a smile, "Just put it down and turn around. Besides, what's the point of facing away? The superior should be behind the curtain, and no one can see their face. Okay, you face the wall during the wedding banquet, that's it? Ha ha." Generals Tu Qinchu, Chen Jiyi, and Yuqi Zhenbei laughed heartily when they heard this. The fathers of the 4 generals of the Ziliang army all fought with the General Su Lai in the past, and they were sworn in life and death. Naturally, their children have been born and died together since childhood. They are superiors and subordinates to the outside world, but they are close buddies in private. The son of Su Wang Suyu was about to get married, and the 4 generals, all of whom were uncles, naturally came back and personally helped decorate the wedding venue. It's just that a general who leads troops to fight may be good at setting up camps, but he is obviously an amateur at decorating houses. He can't understand feng shui and pay attention to it. The servants of the palace don't dare to make mistakes, so they can only follow behind and make adjustments secretly. Aunt Dingxiang is the personal maid of Princess Su. After the princess enters the door, she will naturally become the concubine of Prince Su. When she saw Prince Su standing on the roof and giving directions blindly, she felt anxious and spoke to dissuade her. "My lord, you can leave these matters to me. Come down, there is a war in the east, and there are many things you need to decide." King Su looked at the drawings and shook his head. How can I stay in the military camp and ignore my son's wedding? Let your young lady know that I will be killed. Besides, Suzhou cannot be attacked from the east, and the matter is not urgent. Talking about the same thing here. Seeing this, Grandma Dingxiang couldn't stop trying to dissuade her. Yuzhulu hung a straight knife on his waist and stood beside King Su to prevent him from falling. At this time, he said smoothly. The news came 2 days ago that the imperial court ordered the King of Chu to go to the south of the Yangtze River to quell the rebellion. The King of Chu used the excuse that it was difficult to mobilize troops during the war in the north, so he only sent 30,000 infantry and walked slowly towards the south of the Yangtze River. Seeing his attitude, he didn't want to. The King of Wu also contacted the King of Chu. The King of Chu was ambiguous and did not agree, but he deliberately disclosed the matter to the court, apparently to let the court know that the King of Wu was wooing him and to put pressure on the court so that he could negotiate terms with the court. Su Wang Suyu snorted at this. Song Zhengping is the most arrogant guy. He is not willing to be a pawn for others. His condition must be to give Song Ji the Zen position to him and let him clean up this mess. Yuzhulu thought for a moment, if the situation gets out of control, will the current emperor throw the mess to the King of Chu? Suyu shook his head. How is it possible? With Song Ji's attitude of being above the top and only believing in himself, he would kill anyone who might seize power, let alone snatch it. It's still early, at least delay it for some time until King Wu can bear it. The King of Chu will take action only if he can't stop being cruel. I am eating sand in the northwest, so far away, it is useless to talk about it for the time being. While talking, outside the gate of the palace, Lao Xiao walked in with a cane and raised his hand. Your Majesty, the young prince has arrived outside the city. Suyu was overjoyed when he heard this and threw the drawing to Yuzhulu. Quick, quick, clean it up. My daughter-in-law is coming, so don't scare anyone. Get the meeting gifts you prepared, 2 portions for the Xiao family and 1 small sour radish. For my share. Lao Xiao chuckled, 3 portions are definitely not enough. The young prince also met some confidants on the road, so we can't ignore them anymore. Suyu went down to the front of the palace and looked slightly satisfied. My son, of course I understand, so I specially prepared 2 more portions. 9 came, not counting the maids. Su Wang Suyu. 4 generals, rightward arrow. Rightward arrow, dot. Aunt Dingxiang staggered, turned around and said, 9? We have only been out for less than 6 months. How could your child have such a cold temperament? Suyu's expression froze for a moment, but he immediately raised his hand and said, 9 are 9. This king's son, really doesn't follow his father. Who taught him this? Old Xiao, you old pervert, did you lead your child into trouble? Old Xiao held his cane and shrugged slightly. Prince, as you said, the young prince didn't lead me bad, it's because I, Old Xiao, have good concentration. Ding Xiang thought for a moment, it's probably Mrs. Lu. That sour radish can teach you so much, I won't write the word promise upside down. Amidst the commotion, the whole family rushed out of the door. Outside Suzhou City, Ziliang cavalry led the way, and business travelers stopped by the official road to watch the long motorcade pass by. A huge chariot with 5 horses running abreast walked in the front, decorated with the word in red cloth, looking majestic yet festive. Dozens of carriages followed behind. In addition to the carriages they were riding in, there were also many trucks behind them, which were loaded with Xiao Xiang'er's collection for more than 10 years, Xiao Qi's dowry, various souvenirs that the girls came to buy along the way, etc. The trip to the south of the Yangtze River took a long circle around the whole Daewoo. The total distance was no less than 10,000 miles, and most of the time was on the boat. I bought a lot of things in my spare time, including the medicinal materials used by Xiang'er and Hongluan to make skincare products. They all bought a large cart, as well as various local specialties that are not available in Ziliang, etc. Getting off the ship from Lanzhou and walking hundreds of miles overland to Suzhou was not a very interesting process. The carriage is not as spacious as a yacht-like building, and there is no room to move your hands and feet. At first, you can ride a horse chasing the wind to have fun near the team, but you are tired after riding for a long time, and there is not much scenery in the Hexi corridor, so in the end, everyone is sitting back in the carriage. I stared blankly. Zhu Manzi was almost going crazy from the suffocation. At this moment, he was lying on his back in the carriage, with the latest hardcover version of Sword Master Zulu and the 7 heroic girls of Ime covered on his face, and he kept humming. Sand, sand, it's all sand. Where are the flowers? There aren't even a few places for people to live. Mr. Su is lying. This place is not fun at all. I will never come here again. Song Yufu also came to Ziliang for the first time. She had heard that Ziliang was a barren land, but she did not expect that even grass was rare and it was not as good as the small village where her grandfather lived in seclusion. She hugged her knees and looked outside, then whispered. Manzi, you got married here and you can't leave. There will be no next time. Zhu Manzi became even more helpless and snorted, yeah, what can I do? How will I live for the rest of my life? Ning Qingyi has also never been here, but he has not been interested in mountains and rivers since he was a child, and it is the same wherever he lives. Although Su Buling has been hiding from Su Buling these days because of the couple thing, and he is a little confused because of his worries, but when he saw his good sister Manzi going crazy, she still comforted her. Manzi, you were kicked out by the wolf guard. Didn't you say that you want to build a tiger guard? From now on, you will help guard the palace, so you won't have anything to do. When Zhu Manzi heard this, he immediately became unhappy. I'm not going to do it myself. Is there any difference? The difference is huge. I am a wolf guard who passed the test myself. If I stay on, the boss has no power to kick me out. At most, I will be sent to patrol the streets to provide for my retirement. Ning Qingyi suddenly realized, no wonder I accompanied you on patrol every day when I was in Chang'an City. Zhongli Chuchu was wearing a red dress and leaned in front of Song Yufu. Hearing this, he shook his head, I have been here once. Although the city is not as good as Chang'an and Jiangnan, it is still quite prosperous, and Su Buring is from here. The two emperor, everything you see belongs to his house, and it is more comfortable to stay here than outside. Song Yufu grew up in Chang'an and taught for princes and nobles in the Imperial College. Regarding this statement, she explained softly. Although it is said that the whole world is not the king's land, even the emperor cannot think that everything in the world is his own and can be used at will. The emperor has to spend money to buy food and clothes, let alone seize the common people's property. Regarding land, the imperial court is divided into a national treasury and an inner treasury. The treasury is the court's money and cannot be touched by the emperor. The inner treasury is the emperor's own money, and the same applies to the vassal king. Ning Qingyi thought for a moment and tilted her head slightly, the emperor is the oldest. If he doesn't follow the rules, who will take care of him? Song Yufu thought for a while, I will supervise you, but as long as you are not a confused king, you will pay attention to these details. After all, just the monthly salary and food can never be spent. Zhongli Chuchu looked a little confused, the emperor and the prince also have monthly salary. It must be true. The current emperor's monthly salary is 100,000 taels. During the previous Qi dynasty, some emperors even bargained with ministers from the Ministry of Revenue because they didn't have enough money. Zhu Manzi sat up, a monthly salary of 100,000 taels? No wonder everyone wants to be the emperor. I work as an errand in the Wolf Guard, and I only get a few taels of silver a month. Is there a monthly salary for being a concubine? Song Yufu blinked her eyes and blushed, yes, yes, but how much is given? The man can't control it, it depends on the lady's wishes. If you are not favored and disliked by the lady, you have to do the work. You may have to go hungry. Ning Qingyi raised her eyebrows. Man Zi is a member of the Jianghu community after all. If he is really rejected and can't afford to be hungry, he can come out to perform. Well, the crown prince's chest will be broken, and he will definitely make a lot of money every day. Zhu Manzi's eyes lit up. Yeah, why didn't I expect? Hey. I'm just joking, don't take it seriously. Pht, ha ha ha, just teasing you. Su Buling also performed The Little Prince stews himself in an iron pot. I heard Mrs. Lu talk about it. Really? Tell me quickly. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 609. The little girls were worried about what they would do after marrying into the prince's palace. In the carriage behind, the situation was similar. Zhongli Jiju was sitting in a carriage. After learning the wedding time, she was obviously a little nervous. Although she had already married Su Buling and had a marriage certificate with a jade seal, it was a secret affair between the two of them in private. Business occasions had to go through the motions, meeting relatives and friends of her husband's family, toasting tea to her future father-in-law, etc. Zhongli Jiju was born in a village in Nanyu, and she was a woman from the world. She was about to meet her future father, who was still a vassal king who broke the land and sealed the territory. He didn't even know how to say hello. At this time, Ning Yuhi was pulled over and persuaded with a pleasant tone. He, you really don't want to come in together? We have been fighting for so many years, and you haven't given up an inch. This time you let me go in first. You will have to call me sister from now on, and you will always be overpowered by me. Think about it. Looking at this look, he is obviously timid and wants to be supported by others. Ning Yuhi was wearing a Taoist robe and looked like a fairy. He was actually a little worried about entering the door. She rarely gave Zhongli Jiju a cold look, but sighed softly. It's not like you don't know about my relationship with King Yi. How can I get in now? I can't be like you and ignore my apprentice's feelings. When Zhongli Jiju heard this, her face turned red and she was slightly annoyed. I didn't mean it. Who would have thought that Chu Chu and your apprentice could run in to catch an adulterer at that time? I almost hit the wall in a hurry. Didn't you? If I meet you, you will probably be a worse person than me when you are caught. Ning Yuhi did not deny this and was silent for a moment. You and Chu Chu are just going to waste your time like this. Zhongli Jiju was thinking quickly. When he heard this, he knew that there was something in Ning Yuhi's words, so he leaned a little closer. He, is there anything you can do? Call me sister. Sister. Ning Yuhi said and thought for a moment. Your apprentice definitely doesn't believe you now, but he knows that you and I are incompatible. If I go to persuade her and say some good words to you, the effect will be much better. Zhongli Jiju frowned slightly and thought for a moment. Su Buletinling's persuasion is useless. What's the use of your persuasion? A dead horse is a living doctor. It will definitely be useless for you and Su Buling to persuade you. Chu Chu will only become more and more estranged. When you and Su Buling get married on the night of your wedding, Chu Chu will definitely be very disappointed. I went to persuade you at that time. With me and King Yi's example is in front of her, and she will be more accepting. If I help you take on more responsibilities, Chu Chu might forgive you. Zhongli Jiju pursed her lips, feeling that it made sense, and hesitated for a moment. It's okay to try, thank you. Ning Yuhi narrowed his eyes slightly. Don't thank me, I won't help you for nothing, there are conditions. Don't I call you sister now? First come, first served, you should have called me sister. Zhongli Jiju sat up a little straighter and straightened her chest slightly. Ning Yuhi, Don't push yourself too far. Either make demands or call you sister. If you want to have both, there's no way. Ning Yuhi blinked and hesitated. Well, if I help you convince Chu Chu, when the opportunity is right in the future, you will have to help me bear the thunder. Let's just say that the matter between me and Su Buling was the result of you to set up a trap. Zhongli Jiju was stunned for a moment and spread his hands slightly. The matter between you and Su Buling was originally caused by me, cough dash. Ning Yuhi's face turned cold. Zhongli Jiju sensed that something was wrong and quickly explained, I drink the wine that reveals my heart. You are not clean yourself, otherwise you will fall into the trap. Let's not blame each other. I am still your matchmaker. Ning Yuhi took a few deep breaths. Well, in that case, you have to confess to King Yi when the time comes and admit your evil deeds, so that King Yi won't blame me. Zhongli Jiju thought about it and hesitated a little. Isn't it a bit? Otherwise, what should we do? Either you and Su Buling break up, or you drive Chu Chu back to South Vietnam and occupy Su Buling alone. How is this possible? Okay, it's up to you, give it a try. The huge chariot at the front of the motorcade is King Su's carriage. It is basically a mobile house. There is a small aisle on the outside, and inside there are beds, sofas, and coffee tables. Xiao Qi was sitting in front of the dressing table. The long black dress she wore all year round was replaced by a more festive red dress. She looked exactly the same as Xiao Xiang'er, and now there was no difference at all. Lu Hongluan stood behind, helping to tie Xiao Qi's hair, looking slightly dazed. Lu Hongluan had promised to give her everything when she arrived in Suzhou, and she officially changed from aunt to daughter-in-law. Although it is unfair to the public, King Su must know that when he was a child, he often gave Prince Su troubles and even called him brother, and suddenly he became someone's daughter-in-law. But it's not easy to speak. After all, these days, when Su Buling, Xiao Qi, and Xiang'er were messing around, Lu Hongluan was dragged into participating. Although she didn't take the last step, what could she hold on to in that situation? She felt dizzy several times. Yes, he almost imitated Xiang'er and moved on his own. Lu Hongluan liked to be jealous. Originally she was shy and restrained by etiquette and did not dare to cross the line. Now she has heard and seen her, and is constantly provoked by Xiang'er. She can no longer bear it. Although he was still weird in his heart, Lu Hongluan's thoughts have changed. Long-term pain is worse than short-term pain. When Ling and I are successful, we must take good care of Xiang'er. I can do everything Xiang'er can do. I am still Aunt Ling. If I can't suppress Xiang'er anymore, then the grievances I have endured for the past 6 months will be in vain. Xiao Xiang'er leaned lazily on the soft couch and watched Lu Hongluan combing her hair. She was well aware of her good sister's little thoughts, but she didn't care at all. Returning to Suzhou again, Xiao Xiang'er no longer felt as hesitant and uneasy as last time. After all, as long as her sister married into the palace and became the concubine, she could use her sister's identity to walk around openly. At that time, Xiao Qi would be sitting in the study every day dealing with a mountain of official duties, and she would be exhausted to death, while she would accompany her sister's man to travel around the mountains and rivers, and accept the love of the people. It's embarrassing to think about it. While the 3 people were packing up, the sound of horse hooves was heard outside the carriage, and then Su Buling jumped on the carriage and walked into the carriage. Xiao Xiang'er held her cheek with her hand and said doubtfully, Su Buletin Ling, if you don't go ahead to clear the way, what are you doing here? You and my sister are not married yet, so it is against the rules to get together in advance. Su Buling was wearing a royal robe embroidered with gold and looked slightly embarrassed. When I went out, I told Lao Xiao to bring back some books for him, but I forgot all of them, so I won't be able to explain them later. Are there any rare and unique books that we are bringing back? In order to relieve her boredom on the road, Xiao Qi brought a library of books, including many rare ancient books. After hearing this, she turned around and said, I brought a lot. What kind do you want? There seems to be no martial arts secret book. Well, Su Buling couldn't explain it easily and thought for a long time. Well, it's the kind, that's more elegant, or records the way to reconcile yin and yang, similar to the Emperor's Internal Classic. Xiao Qi has been extremely smart since she was a child. When she saw Su Buletinling hesitating and saying this, she immediately understood what was going on and immediately frowned. Why would I bring that kind of book? Su Buling thought about it, nodded and said, Oh, that's right. I don't usually read those things. It's just Lao Xiao who likes this. Lu Hongluan pursed her lips and hesitated. Ling if you don't look, where did you learn those moves to bully Xiang Su Buling coughed lightly, self-taught. Forget it, I'll explain to Lao Xiao. He was about to go out. Xiao Xiang thought about it and suddenly sat up. You wait. Su Buletinling paused, turned around and said, Baby, do you have one? How could I hide those things? Xiao Xiang turned her head and looked at Xiao Qi, who was slightly stiff. Sister, don't you like to collect ancient books? I remember that you hid a lot of messy books. I peeked at them when I was a child, and there seemed to be. Xiao Qi's face was serious. No, you remembered it wrong. How could I remember it wrong? Xiao Xiang regained her energy, stood up quickly, pulled Su Buling to the corner of the carriage, and searched among the few small boxes Xiao Qi had brought with her. Xiao Qi suddenly became anxious. Feng Qingyundan's expression could no longer be stable. She stood up and said, Don't mess around, give it back to me. Naturally, these shady things were collected together. When the small box was opened, it was filled with various illustrated little books, most of them with annotations. There were even a few poems by Su Buling, as well as some poems by Xiao. When she was bored in her free time, she secretly wrote love poems and so on, which made her feel numb just by glancing at them. Xiao Qi's face turned red and she ran over to grab the box. Xiao Xiang's little box was discovered by her sister. She was laughed at and gave up on herself. When she discovered that her aloof sister had hidden so many secrets, her expression suddenly became ambiguous. Hey, sister, I didn't see it. I thought you could only let go when you were dizzy, but I didn't expect that in private. Dai Xiang give it back to me. Su Buling was also stunned for a moment, picked up the little book and looked through it a few times. Well, Kikai, you have read so many books, why do you still need me to teach you? You still pretend that you can't learn it, so I said, how could you, a smart person like you, not even be able to learn the lying posture? Xiao Qi was ashamed and embarrassed. She raised her hand and snatched the love poem from the book and stuffed it into the box. I collected this in my spare time. I don't read much. The words were very unconfident. Su Buling nodded, I know, keep it well and discuss it together when we have time. I went down first and told Lao Xiao that I couldn't find it. Xiao Qi pursed her lips, took out two unannotated little books from the box, and threw them to Su Buling. Take it. I just read it in my spare time to appreciate the ancient books. It's not what you think. If you don't believe it, forget it. I understand. While chatting, the carriage arrived outside Suzhou City. The girls who were playing around put away all their thoughts at the same time, got off the carriage in a polite manner, and accompanied Su Buling to visit the smiling King Su. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 610. 2,500 miles away from Taiyuan, the war in the Central Plains could hardly affect Suzhou City in the northwest border. The huge city had just passed the atmosphere of the New Year's Eve, and the foreign merchants started to set off again, loading goods to start the annual round trip. The streets and alleys can be considered prosperous, but it is located in the wilderness outside the Great Wall. Apart from the merchants and border troops, there is nothing worth seeing. Occasionally, something new will attract the attention of most people. After noon, the prince returned to the city. A boat of young girls rode on the carriage, following Su Buling in white clothes, and slowly walked through Xianlong Street amid the welcome of Suzhou people. Maybe the people were too enthusiastic, the girls were obviously not interested, and they didn't even dare to look at them, and they hid in the carriage honestly. Arriving at the Suwang mansion, Suwang Suyu stood outside the gate with a smile on his face, and behind him were 4 generals, guests, and staff. The reception was grand. The girls got off the car one after another. Seeing this scene, they were obviously a little restrained. They hid behind Xiao Qi and Lu Hongluan, almost forming a long snake formation. Su Buling was not nervous when he returned to his own home. He introduced the guests to the Suwang enthusiastically, saying, "This is my master, this is my senior sister, this is Zhongli Jeju, this is Jeju's apprentice." The relationship was a mess, and the Suwang, who was in charge of one side, was confused. "I thought they only brought back a few girls, but how come there were 2 pairs of masters and apprentices? Who of these masters and apprentices married in? Don't say they married in together." Ning Yuhi seemed to be the queen who escaped from marriage in Songji. According to seniority, she had to call her sister-in-law who had not yet married. Suwang Suyu pondered for a long time, but he didn't know how to calculate the seniority. In the end, he simply put on the airs of a prince, nodded slightly and remained silent. The girls naturally couldn't chat with the Suwang. After politely bowing and greeting, they entered the palace. The Suwang mansion is quite large, but the Su family has only one son for 3 generations, and there are not many relatives, so most of the mansion is empty. The girls may settle down in the Su family, so they naturally won't live in the guest room. Aunt Ding Xiang specially arranged a mansion for each of them, and took the girls to move in, eat, bathe, and clean the room. It took most of the day to toss and turn. In the study of the mansion, after Suwang Suyu met Xiao Qi, he sat on a chair, holding a teacup, and his face still had a bit of weirdness. Su Buling sat by the tea table, holding the wedding arrangements for a few days in his hand, and carefully checked them by the light. Lu Hongluan sat by the tea table, with his hands folded on his waist. His expression was very embarrassed, and he wanted to speak several times, but he didn't know where to start. When Suyu was in Chang'an City, he was often troubled by Lu Hongluan, who was still a little girl. He was only so polite when he cheated money and asked him for help. He looked at her for a few times and asked curiously, "Little sour carrot, do you have anything else to say?" Lu Hongluan narrowed her eyes slightly, and after a moment, she still didn't fight back, but smiled. "Brother Su, I want to discuss something with you, it's a bit difficult to say." Suyu smiled and was very easygoing. "I have known you for so many years, and I have always regarded you as my own sister. What's wrong with saying it?" Lu Hongluan's charming face showed a little blush and embarrassment, and she glanced at Su Buling. "It's not a big deal, my sister left early, and Ling after arriving in Chang'an, was closer to me, so I naturally got close to Ling and then we got close to each other, so. Suyu smiled a little, knowing what Lu Hongluan meant. When Princess Su was still alive, she often mentioned this adopted sister far away in Chang'an. When Su Buling was born, she had considered letting Hongluan, who was only about 10 years old, marry as a child bride. However, the previous emperor was in power at that time, and he was quite strict with the princes and clans. The relationship between the Su family and the court was not so irreconcilable. In order to avoid suspicion, this proposal was finally shelved. Later, the marriage between the Xiao and Lu families was naturally abandoned. Suyu sent Su Buling to Chang'an and asked Lu Hongluan to take care of him. First, he knew Lu Hongluan well and trusted her. Second, Lu Hongluan had been a widow since she was a teenager, and she lived a pitiful life alone. If Princess Su was there, she would definitely not be able to bear it. Letting Ling Er accompany him was like having a younger generation to take care of him. If something happened between the two of them, Su Yu could avenge the past. Su Yu smiled, seeing through but not saying anything. What? Hongluan, you don't have to be so distant, just say what you want to say. Lu Hongluan tightly grasped her skirt, glanced at Su Buling who was watching the nose and the heart, and forced a smile. It's Ling Er, this child, who doesn't follow the rules. When he was in Chang'an, he treated me, forget it, I'm his aunt, I shouldn't care about these things. From the look on her face, it's obvious that she has backed down. Su Buling shook his head secretly, put down the book, held Lu Hongluan's hand, and said very straightforwardly. Father, Aunt Lu and I are truly in love. Pa, no. Lu Hongluan instantly exploded, hurriedly pulled her hand away, and spoke incoherently, and it was impossible to hear what she was saying. Judging from her expression, she should want to deny and clarify. Su Yu smiled secretly in his heart, but he pretended to be relieved on his face and sighed slowly. Forget it, I know, Hongluan, you said that I was not worthy of the princess back then, but now. Lu Hongluan's face was red as blood. She was a gentle person, so she couldn't handle such a public execution. She stood up and ran out. Su Buling was afraid that Aunt Lu would be upset, so he stood up quickly and raised his hand to salute. Father, please rest early. I'll go see Aunt Lu. Su Yu picked up the teacup and took a sip, feeling quite happy. Go, bring me here to call you Dad tomorrow. I've been waiting for this day for more than 10 years. It's not easy. It was a quiet night in the house, and the maids were busy walking through the houses, sorting out the girls' future residence. Zhu Manzi, Ning Qingyi, and Zhongli Chuchu were all women from the martial arts world. They didn't like the feeling of being held up by the stars, so they sneaked to the side of the palace and sat on the roof of a building. Song Yufu was also carried to the roof, and the four little girls took turns watching the night scenery inside and outside Suzhou City with binoculars. Lu Hongluan walked out of the palace study and hurriedly ran to the back house. After taking a few steps, he saw the maid passing by, and quickly folded his hands on his lower abdomen, looking dignified and steady. He had already confessed to King Su, and King Su agreed so simply. Lu Hongluan was naturally a little panicked. In the past, Lu Hongluan always thought, how shocked will King Su be when he finds out? Will you object? In other words, she is an old cow eating young grass. This is good, nothing happened that I was worried about, which means. Lu Hongluan's expression was tangled, and she ran to Xiang'er's yard with her head buried, hoping to find something to say to her good sisters to comfort her current chaotic emotions. But before he took a few steps, a figure appeared in front of him. Blocking the road in the corridor, he was dressed in white as snow, with a face as beautiful as a crown of jade, with a bright smile that I often miss when I dream back at midnight. Your Majesty. Lu Hongluan curled her hands on her chest, and there was panic on Feng Yun's cheeks. She glanced at it, then quickly looked at the tip of her shoes, trying to calm down. Your Majesty, I'm tired. I'm going back to my room to rest. If anything happens, I'll talk about it tomorrow. Su Buletinling smiled, took half a step forward, looked down at Lu Hongluan's cheek. Auntie, have you forgotten something? What's going on? Lu Hongluan asked knowingly and looked confused. Su Buling sighed, it's okay if Aunt Lu forgets. I'll remember. Let's go and consummate the marriage. Consummate the marriage. Lu Hongluan shrank her neck, her charming and mature cheeks full of shyness and panic. After thinking about it, she showed her aunt's momentum and raised her hand to slap Su Buling on the chest. Damn boy, What are you talking about? I, I remember, we agreed to pay homage to heaven and earth and follow the procedures. How can you be so anxious? Auntie Greedy's body is so greedy that her head is broken. Su Buling put his arms around Lu Hongluan's shoulders and smiled proudly. How could I forget what I promised Aunt Lu? As long as you haven't forgotten, we'll make arrangements in a few days. I'll go back to my room first. It's been arranged, otherwise what would I do all afternoon? Lu Hongluan's slightly relaxed expression froze. In the afternoon she accompanied Xiao Qi to meet Prince Su, and Su Buling said she was going out to see the wedding scene, but she dared to go see her wedding scene. Lu Hongluan came back to his senses, his eyes suddenly panicked. Ling why are you so anxious? Su Buling hugged her a little tighter and smiled brightly. Let's go, be good. Keep your word. Lu Hongluan bit her lower lip, unwilling to move. With her mind racing, she added. I'm going back to my room to get something, it's very important. Su Buling naturally knew what it was and raised his hand and snapped his fingers. At the corner of the corridor, Xiao Xiang who was watching the play by eavesdropping, ran out quickly, holding a small box in his hand, and walked up to him with a smile. Hongluan, you can't run away today. I just asked you slave to dig out the white handkerchief and other things. There is also a wedding gift I specially prepared for you, with a dyed green tail. Don't you like to wear green clothes? Lu Hongluan was originally extremely embarrassed, but when she saw Xiao Xiang's face looking like a joke, she immediately became a little tougher, raised her hand to grab the small box, and then threw the tail back to Xiao Xiang. Gun, what does it have to do with you? Your private affairs and mine have nothing to do with you. This sentence, myself and your child's private affairs, can be regarded as treating others in their own way. Xiao Xiang wasn't angry at all, with a smile in her almond-shaped eyes. It has nothing to do with me. I can't sleep at night. If you don't like it, I just took Su Buling away. We are already an old married couple. There is no one beside the pillow. A man cannot sleep well. Lu Hongluan knew that Xiao Xiang was irritating her, but she was just angry. She frowned, took Su Buling and left. Who says I'm not happy? I let you give me your daughter for 1 year without fighting for it for the sake of our sisterly friendship. I won't have anything to do without you in the future. Xiao Xiang's eyebrows were crooked, and she watched the two of them go away, then said, Hongluan, what do you want to eat tomorrow morning? I'll bring it to you. Bah, I don't need you to serve me. Do you think I can't get up like you? The sound faded away. Su Buletinling felt warm in her heart and secretly gave the baby a thumbs up.